I still remember the evening light pouring through the kitchen windows of my suburban Dallas home, the warm Texas sun making the entire house glow in shades of gold. My name is Alicia Carter, and I'm 42 years old. I've lived in this neighborhood for nearly 10 years, the kind of place where you hear kids playing baseball in the street and smell barbecue every weekend. If you'd met me 6 months ago, you would have seen a woman who smiled a lot, but never quite seemed happy. You might have noticed the way I hovered near the edges of every gathering, head slightly bowed, always glancing at my husband Jake for approval. At the time, I believed I was just being a supportive wife. I worked as an event planner for a local organization, helping churches and nonprofits set up holiday drives, charity galas, and community outreach events. People praised me for my efficiency and warm heart. Yet behind closed doors, I felt small and powerless, constantly belittled by the very person who'd promised to love me most in this world. You see, Jake had this remarkable gift for making everyone laugh. When we first met, I was drawn in by what I thought was his easy humor. I'd soon find out his jokes all came at a price: my dignity. I endured it for years. Whenever friends gathered, I was just the sidekick to his comedic performance. If I spoke up too long, he'd tease me for rambling. If I cooked a meal and it wasn't perfect, he'd turn it into a stand-up routine for our guests. If I so much as tripped on the sidewalk, he'd spin it into a funny anecdote about how clumsy I was, and everyone would laugh. Sometimes folks think, why would you let him do that more than once? Or, if it bothered you, why not just confront him and end it? Well, it's never that simple, is it? Love complicates things. Promises complicate things. And in my case, loyalty and fear kept me quiet. Eventually, though, a moment came when I realized if I didn't speak up, I'd lose every part of myself that I'd once cherished. This story is about the night I finally chose to stand up for myself and the life-changing ripple effects that followed. Along the way, I learned that sometimes we can mistake cruelty for humor and condemnation for just teasing. But real love doesn't leave bruises on your heart. If you've ever felt overshadowed, demeaned, or made into a perpetual punchline, I hope my journey will resonate with you. It's a story that starts with light banter and ends with discovering a strength I never knew I had. So, let's begin with how Jake and I first met. Back when I thought I'd found the funniest, most charming man in the world, Jake and I crossed paths at a local charity gala I'd organized in downtown Dallas. I'd spent months planning the event, securing a jazz band and coordinating with vendors to make sure everything went smoothly. It was summertime in Texas, so the heat was sweltering, but inside the venue, everyone was dressed in their best cocktail attire. I was standing near the welcome table, checking off RSVPs, when a tall, dark-haired man approached with a broad grin. I recognized him instantly, Jake Marshall, a financial advisor known around town for his witty speaking engagements. "Must be the hardest working lady in Dallas," he said, offering his hand. "I hear you're the mastermind behind these fancy soirees." That simple exchange set the tone for our initial spark. He was charming and playful. At one point, I accidentally dropped my pen beneath the table. He knelt down to get it and popped back up saying, "Don't worry, I'm here to pick up the pieces," handing me my pen with a wink. I remember how quickly my cheeks heated and how my usual composure melted under his gaze. Over the next few months, we started dating. I was 37 at the time, proud of my independence. I'd built a career I loved and owned a modest home near White Rock Lake. Jake, a few years older than me, was equally proud of his reputation and success. He always had people gathered around him, laughing at his stories, praising his quick wit. Even my girlfriends were excited about him. "It's so refreshing to meet a guy with a sense of humor," they'd say. "He's so much more fun than those stiff business types." I agreed, at least in the beginning. I didn't notice at first that many of Jake's funniest lines were actually digs at other people, small jabs that left me feeling uneasy. He'd make remarks about someone's outdated outfit or how they stumbled over a phrase. When he turned his mild teasing in my direction, I laughed it off. After all, it was just a joke, right? When we got engaged a year later, it felt like a triumph. I pictured us as the unstoppable duo. Me planning fabulous events that raised money for good causes, him forging connections as a top financial advisor. My mother once told me, "A shared sense of humor is gold in a marriage," so I thought I'd struck it rich. Little did I know that sense of humor would eventually become a weapon, and I would be the biggest casualty of it. Still, our wedding was gorgeous. We held it at a small vineyard north of Dallas, under a canopy of string lights. I wore a simple, off-the-shoulder gown, and Jake was in a sleek charcoal suit. Despite my nerves, I remember thinking, this is it, we're going to be so happy when we said our vows. He winked and made the crowd giggle with a line about me being the second best event planner in the state, after him. People clapped. I blushed, letting it slide. If only I'd recognized that as a sign of things to come. A marriage where every heartfelt moment might be turned into a punchline at my expense. After the wedding, Jake moved into my place near White Rock Lake. Initially, it felt like a cozy adventure. We had late-night chats on the patio, sipping sweet tea, planning our future together. He talked about wanting to expand his client base, and I dreamed about starting my own small event planning company. Somewhere along the line, though, his jokes began to sting. Maybe it was the time he organized a game night for our friends. I spent the whole day cooking chili, cornbread, and a batch of homemade brownies. As soon as everyone arrived, Jake praised my cooking, then followed up with a quip. But guys, be prepared to douse it in hot sauce if you actually want flavor. Cue the laughter. It was a small remark, but it stuck with me. I'd worked so hard to make everything perfect. Yet, in front of our friends, my husband basically told them my cooking was bland. I shrugged it off, thinking, he's just being playful. But as the months rolled on, the jokes kept coming. My clothes. Alicia, honey, you don't have to match your shoes to the 1980s. My driving. You know Alicia's behind the wheel if there's a line of honking cars half a mile long. My work. She plans incredible events, but you should have seen her meltdown when she forgot to order enough canapes one time. Hilarious. He laughed. Others joined in. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. My parents had raised me to be modest and forgiving, so I tried to let it wash over me. The real concern set in when I realized how reluctant I'd become to share any personal details, even with my closest friends. If I told Jake about an embarrassing mistake at work or a slip-up in the kitchen, I braced myself for him to turn it into comedic gold at our next gathering. Strangely, I found ways to rationalize it. It's how he deals with stress, I told my best friend Kim. He jokes to lighten the mood. Kim eyed me carefully and suggested I talk to him. I half laughed it off. He's harmless, Kim. He'd never intentionally hurt me. But Kim wasn't fully convinced. There's a difference between playful teasing and constant mockery, she cautioned. At the same time, Jake showed glimpses of genuine love. If I fell asleep on the couch, he'd gently cover me with a blanket. When I had a massive event, he'd swing by with coffee and snacks for the staff. These gestures made me doubt my own instincts. Surely, if he's capable of this kindness, I'd think, the teasing can't be that bad. And then, quietly, a far more serious issue began to emerge in our bedroom. Jake started avoiding intimacy. He'd make excuses, exhaustion, busy schedule, stress. Eventually, I realized it wasn't just a matter of being tired. Something deeper was wrong. He dismissed my gentle concerns, telling me he was fine. Don't worry, Alicia, he'd say breezily. I'm just going through a phase. I wanted to believe him. Yet he turned increasingly sour whenever I asked him about seeing a doctor or a therapist. One night, he practically yelled at me, "Stop nagging! You're making a big deal out of nothing." It was the first time I felt genuine fear ripple through me. The same man who teased me publicly was now shutting me down in private. I had no idea how much worse it would get, or how deeply I'd keep his secret tucked away. Month by month, the gap between Jake and me widened. At home, he was moody and defensive. At social events, his jokes grew sharper, always directed at my supposed shortcomings. Yet I stayed, convinced I could fix our marriage if I just tried harder. Meanwhile, my career as an event planner flourished. Thanks to my experience, I snagged a coveted spot organizing a high-profile fundraiser for a major hospital in Dallas. My boss, Harriet Lang, was known for her no-nonsense approach. She congratulated me on securing a record number of donors. "You've got quite a skill for persuasion," Harriet told me one day in her office. "Keep this up, and you'll have your own firm one day." Her words should have filled me with excitement, but a voice in my head, sounding suspiciously like Jake, whispered, "Don't let it get to your head." Harriet noticed my hesitation. "Is everything all right at home?" she asked gently. "Sometimes I see you hesitate, like you're afraid to speak your mind." I gave her a weak smile. Oh, marriage has ups and downs. I'm just trying to balance everything. In reality, I was tiptoeing on eggshells at home. Jake had his own setback: impotence. After years of putting off any doctor's visit, he finally conceded to see a specialist. When the doctor recommended therapy and medication for erectile dysfunction, Jake was furious. He came home ranting about quack doctors and mind games. As his wife, I promised to keep his diagnosis private. "This is our business," I told him, placing my hand on his. But that vow of secrecy came at a price. Jake, deeply insecure about this condition, retaliated by doubling down on his public humiliations of me. During a small dinner with two of his clients, he launched into a story about how I once forgot to put sugar in a pie recipe. "She's a great planner, but a lousy cook," he joked, raising his glass. "We can't all have talent in the kitchen." I felt my cheeks burn, but said nothing. After dinner, I cried in the bathroom, quietly so no one could hear. It was around this time I noticed a shift in how our friends looked at me. Some seemed to pity me. Others, like Kim, grew visibly angry whenever Jake teased me. One evening, while Jake was across the room, Kim leaned in. "When are you going to stand up for yourself?" she said, eyes flashing. "This isn't okay, Alicia." But how could I explain that I felt trapped by my own promises? On one hand, I was furious at Jake for continually cutting me down. On the other, I knew how sensitive he was about his lack of performance in the bedroom. I didn't want to shame him or hurt him more. The tension built like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Jake's jokes got bolder. My patience got thinner. Friends and acquaintances began whispering about our marriage. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering what my life had become. Was this forever? A never-ending cycle of being the butt of jokes in exchange for a private life defined by frustration and resentment. Looking back, I realize I was afraid. Afraid of confronting Jake's anger, afraid of losing the person I'd committed my life to, and maybe even afraid of who I'd be if I wasn't his loyal, long-suffering wife. But fate, or maybe just my own pent-up anger, was about to push things to a breaking point. The tipping point arrived on a hot Saturday in August, when Jake and I threw a backyard cookout. We invited mutual friends, co-workers, and a couple of neighbors. I spent all week preparing. I marinated chicken in a tangy barbecue sauce, made homemade lemonade, even set up citronella candles to keep mosquitoes away. That afternoon, the yard buzzed with chatter and laughter. The smell of roasting meats and grilled vegetables filled the air. Despite the heat, I felt a glimmer of pride. Maybe this time, we'd just have a normal, happy gathering. But as soon as Jake and a few of the guys congregated around the grill, I heard the familiar ring of his showman's voice. He started with a mild anecdote about someone at the office, then slid into jokes about me. He recounted the time I burned a pot of chili, which I'd spent hours cooking, or so he claimed. That story was exaggerated. I had overcooked it slightly, but he made it sound like I'd set the entire kitchen ablaze. The group chuckled. I pretended not to hear, focusing on refilling the veggie platter. Then came his next punch. "And folks, Alicia wants us to start a family soon. Can you imagine our kids? They'll never get a decent meal if it's up to her." I froze. I could sense the uncomfortable tension in some of our friends. A couple of them offered forced laughs or turned away, unsure how to respond. That comment cut deeper than usual because it wasn't just about cooking. He was publicly mocking our future plans we'd discussed in private. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I felt an anger so fierce it almost made me dizzy. How dare he fling out this cheap joke in front of everyone, especially when he knew exactly why we hadn't been able to conceive or even truly try for a baby. But Jake kept going, oblivious to my fury. "Now let's be real," he announced, brandishing a spatula. "Some people just aren't cut out for parenthood. Right, honey?" The yard was silent. My face burned with a mixture of shame and rage. Neighbors who barely knew us exchanged awkward glances. My friend Kim was shaking her head, her expression furious. I set down the tray of lemonade. I remember my heart thudding so loud, I thought everyone could hear it. Slowly, I walked over to the grill area and said as calmly as I could, "Jake, that's enough." He blinked, surprised. "Uh-oh, looks like someone can't handle a little teasing," he teased, forcing a laugh. I looked around at the small circle of onlookers. And then, I did something I never dreamed I would do. I didn't back down. You want to talk about kids and cooking? I said, voice trembling. Let's talk about what's really going on. Suddenly, it was as if I was standing outside myself, watching this scene unfold. My mind screamed, "Don't you dare tell them. Don't you break your promise. He'll never forgive you." But another, stronger voice insisted, "You can't let him keep humiliating you to hide his own hurt." Jake's face paled. He shook his head slightly, warning me with his eyes. "Alicia?" But I pressed on. "You enjoy telling everyone about my flaws. Well, here's one you forgot. I'm foolish enough to keep your biggest secret while you mock me in front of our friends." I could almost taste the fear in his eyes. He shoved the spatula onto the grill, trying to laugh it off. "She's had one too many beers, folks. Why don't we all—" I cut him off. "No, Jake. I'm stone cold sober, and I'm tired of being the butt of your jokes." The group looked from him to me, uncertain. "You think it's funny to say I can't handle kids," I said, my voice rising. "But the truth is, we haven't been able to even start trying because you refuse to address your own issues in the bedroom." Gasps rustled through the crowd. A friend dropped a plastic cup. Kim covered her mouth. One of Jake's old college buddies swore under his breath. Jake stepped forward, voice low. "Stop it, Alicia. We don't need to drag that out here." For years, I'd promised to keep his impotence private, but the cruelty of turning our personal struggles into a public punchline had shredded my patience. "No," I repeated, shaking my head. "This stops. You can't keep humiliating me to hide your own pain." I half expected the sky to split open. Instead, the sizzling of the grill and the distant hum of traffic were all I heard. Everyone stood there, stunned, waiting to see what would happen next. A hush stretched across our backyard. Jake's face turned pale, and for once, he looked utterly speechless. "This is insane," he finally managed, letting out a forced laugh. "Alicia's blowing things out of proportion, like usual." I could almost see him scrambling to reassert control, but I stood my ground, placing a hand on my hip. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was trying to burst from my chest. Yet I refused to shrink back into the quiet, apologetic wife. "If I'm blowing things out of proportion," I said, voice steady, "then explain why for the past 2 years, you've avoided discussing solutions with your doctor. Explain why you constantly call me incompetent when you—" I paused, swallowing my anger. "When you're the one who won't face reality." Someone cleared their throat. A neighbor picked up her purse and slowly backed away. My friend Kim, though, moved closer, like she was ready to step in if Jake tried to silence me. Jake turned toward her, desperation in his eyes. "Kim, you know this is all just a misunderstanding, right? Alicia's upset because I tease her a little too much sometimes, but it's no reason to—" Kim shook her head, crossing her arms. "Jake, you constantly undermine her. This entire evening, you haven't said one nice thing about Alicia. Maybe you should stop talking and listen." A flicker of rage passed over his face. Then he straightened his shoulders and gave his trademark smile, the one that had always charmed any crowd. "Fine, let's talk about secrets. Did Alicia tell you how she actually got her fancy fundraiser gig? Or how she begged her boss for that lead role, practically on her knees?" My mouth fell open. That was a lie. A vicious attempt to paint me as someone who used underhanded methods to climb the professional ladder. Harriet had personally recognized my organizational skills and assigned me the fundraiser. I'd worked for it honestly. "You're lying," I whispered. "Harriet chose me because I brought in top sponsors last year. You know that." Jake's eyes flashed with something near madness. "Do I? Or maybe I just know what you're capable of doing when you really want something." Tears pricked at my eyes. Not from sadness, but from pure fury. I heard Kim hiss, seriously, as she glared at him. Several guests looked horribly uncomfortable, caught in the crossfire of a marital showdown that was no longer a joke. Then quietly, one of Jake's former colleagues spoke up. "Actually, Jake, I've seen Alicia in action at those events. She's kind, organized, and dedicated. She earned that gig fair and square." Jake shook his head dismissively. "Sure, you'd defend her. You haven't seen the behind-the-scenes meltdown." "Enough!" My voice cracked through the tension. I turned to the group, and my voice became calmer. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this. I've kept quiet about Jake's condition, because I believed it was my duty as his wife. But I won't stand here and let him keep humiliating me just so he can feel better about himself. With that, I set down the spatula I'd been holding, a silly detail, but I'd grabbed it from the grill as the confrontation started, and walked into the house. My hands were shaking, my mind reeling. I'd broken the biggest promise of my marriage, to keep Jake's medical issues private, yet I felt strangely liberated. The guests milled about uncertainly. Some followed me inside. Others started leaving. I caught snippets of hushed conversations. I had no idea. Poor Alicia. Jake went too far. We should probably head out. Jake came stomping through the door after me. His face reddened. Do you realize what you've done? He seethed. I faced him, trembling. I told the truth about why you humiliate me. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. You made me look weak. You'll never fix this, Alicia. My heart clenched. Had he ever truly cared about anything other than appearing strong? It's not my job to fix your insecurities, I said, mustering courage. For years, I tried to help. You kept pushing me away. He glared at me, chest heaving. Don't expect me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. Everyone out there now knows. He choked on the words, the humiliating truth of his impotence. I felt an odd calmness in that moment. Yes, now they do, I replied. Maybe next time you decide to tear someone else down to hide your own pain, you'll think twice. We stood there, locked in a furious silence. Outside, the clamor of guests departing filled the air, accompanied by the smell of smoldering coals. In my mind, I pictured the pieces of my old life scattering like ashes in the wind. The day after our blow-up, Jake disappeared early in the morning, texting me only once to say he needed space. Over the following week, he crashed at a friend's condo while I scrambled to address the fallout. Word spread through our shared circles that Jake and I had had a massive argument. A few people sympathized with him, seeing only that I'd betrayed his confidence. But most folks, especially those who had been at the cookout, quietly reached out to me with support or apologies for not stepping in sooner. Kim insisted on coming over to help me tidy up the house. It looks like a war zone, she muttered, staring at the half-empty trays and the pile of chairs scattered around the yard. I swear, if I'd known what was coming, I'd have pulled you aside sooner and told you to save yourself the trouble. We sorted plates and rinsed out beer cans, working in near silence until Kim finally said, How do you feel? How did I feel? Relief, shame, anger, sadness, like a dozen different emotions wrestling inside me. Honestly, I answered, I feel free, but I also feel guilty. I promised him I'd never tell anyone about his impotence. Kim nodded, setting down a trash bag. He made you keep that secret while he tore you down publicly? That's a toxic dynamic, Alicia. Even if you regret revealing his issue, you can't keep living in a cycle of emotional abuse. That word, abuse, rang in my ears. I'd never thought of Jake's jokes as abuse. But the more I reflected, the more it clicked. He was systematically undermining my confidence, humiliating me in front of others to mask his own insecurity. I spent the next few days going to work, burying myself in my event projects. Harriet, my boss, saw the strain. One afternoon, she found me in the office storage room, rummaging for table linens with tears in my eyes. Alicia, she said gently, if you need time off, take it. Don't push yourself. I shook my head. The hospital fundraiser is next month. I can't drop the ball now. Harriet put a hand on my shoulder. You won't, but you can't pour from an empty cup either. Her kindness nearly broke me. For a moment, I simply sank into her embrace, letting silent tears fall. Later that evening, as I lay in bed, I replayed the entire fiasco in my mind. Jake's face as I exposed his condition, the gasp from our guests, and the stunned silence that followed. A part of me wondered, could we ever repair this? But a stronger part whispered that maybe our marriage had been broken long before the cookout. By the time Jake returned to the house to grab some clothes, the tension was almost suffocating. He moved around me silently, jaw clenched, refusing to meet my eyes. Finally, near the front door, I mustered the courage to ask, "What's next for us?" He shrugged, arms full of shirts and a spare suit. "I don't know, Alicia. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. I can't just pretend that didn't happen." For once, I didn't scramble to apologize. "I can't pretend you haven't been humiliating me for years," I replied softly. He pursed his lips, scanning my face. For a second, I thought I saw something like regret in his eyes. Then he shook his head. "I'll be at Doug's place. Don't wait up." And with that, he walked out. A quiet settled over the house, a lonely stillness, but deep down, I felt a flicker of self-respect. I'd finally stood up to Jake. Whatever happened next, divorce, reconciliation, or something else, I was done being his personal punchline. 2 weeks later, I found myself at a networking event for local nonprofits. Despite my personal chaos, Harriet insisted I attend. "We need to secure fresh sponsors," she said, "and people trust you. Plus, it might be good for you to step out and remember who you are, outside your marriage." I arrived at the upscale restaurant downtown, wearing a burgundy dress and feeling a mix of nervousness and empowerment. I spotted Harriet chatting with a board member by the bar. After grabbing a glass of iced tea, I headed over to greet them. Then I saw Jake. He was in a tailored suit, leaning against the far wall, smiling that familiar grin, talking to a group of well-dressed men and women. My stomach twisted. I hadn't expected him here. I wondered if he'd show me any courtesy or continue his barrage of subtle humiliations. The moment he noticed me, I felt the temperature in the room drop. He quickly ended his conversation and ambled my way. "Fancy seeing you here, Alicia," he said in a low voice. "I'd heard you were busy playing perfect career woman these days." I tensed. Harriet hovered nearby, glancing at me questioningly. I forced a neutral expression. "I'm here to do my job, Jake." He gave a mocking laugh. "Right, you're always doing your job. Or is this another scenario where you'll spin some sob story about how mean I am, so you can garner sympathy from donors?" My cheeks flamed. "That's not what this is, and you know it." He leaned in, lowering his voice to a near growl. "I've lost a lot of respect from my clients because of your little stunt. People are questioning my stability, my marriage. Do you realize the damage you've done?" Anger flared in me. "You damaged yourself when you thought it was okay to disrespect me for years. Did you think your behavior would never catch up with you?" Jake opened his mouth to retort, but Harriet suddenly stepped forward, clearing her throat. "Is everything all right here?" she asked politely. Though her tone carried a warning, Jake tried to smooth on a smile. "Just a little marital disagreement, Harriet. Nothing that concerns you." Harriet gave him an icy stare. "Alicia is one of my best employees. Anything that disturbs her concerns me, actually." A hush fell between us. Jake glanced around the bustling room, clearly self-conscious at being publicly challenged. He forced a laugh. "Well then, guess you should know your best employee turned my private medical issue into an entire barbecue spectacle. That's not exactly how a loving wife behaves." Harriet folded her arms. "I've also witnessed how you've treated Alicia in public. Whatever she revealed, I suspect it was the final straw after a long line of insults." The tension was thick. A few onlookers paused, sensing the confrontation. Jake's face turned tight, his smile vanishing. "So you're on her side too? Wow, Alicia, you're quite the manipulator, turning your boss against your husband." I inhaled, keeping my composure. "Jake, let's not do this here. I'm done being dragged into these scenes." He snorted. "You're done? No, Alicia, I'm done. Done letting you trash my reputation." Then he lowered his voice again, so only Harriet and I could hear. "You're going to regret crossing me." A cold wave of unease rushed through me. Once upon a time, a threat like that would have sent me scampering, eager to please him, but not this time. I steadied my breath. "I regret not standing up to you sooner." Without another word, I turned on my heel and joined Harriet, heading to a circle of potential sponsors who were waiting. Jake remained there, smoldering, with no crowd to laugh at his jokes. The next day, I heard from Kim that Jake had tried to spin the confrontation at the event, telling people I'd orchestrated a public smear campaign against him. But instead of sympathy, he mostly got awkward shrugs. The power he once wielded with a few well-placed jabs was gone. People had seen through his facade. 3 months crawled by, each day bringing new revelations about who I was without Jake's constant presence. We decided to file for divorce, and it was surprisingly straightforward once the lawyers got involved. Jake seemed more concerned about controlling the narrative than about property or finances. He signed the papers with minimal fuss, likely to avoid more public embarrassment. During that time, I moved into a cozy rental home in a quiet neighborhood closer to downtown. my boss Harriet and I grew closer as friends, not just colleagues. She'd invite me to brunch on weekends and introduced me to new acquaintances, never prying, but gently encouraging me to focus on my personal well-being. I even connected with another woman, Janet, who told me a story about her ex-husband's gaslighting. Hearing her talk was like hearing an echo of my own experiences, especially how it took her years to recognize her ex's jokes were actually emotional abuse. She confided, "Men like that can't cope with their own weaknesses, so they make us feel small. It's how they avoid addressing their own pain." I nodded, tears in my eyes. That's exactly what Jake did, and for the longest time, I believed him. Janet squeezed my hand. "You're out of it now. Healing won't happen overnight, but it will happen." At work, my performance soared. Liberated from the constant fear of ridicule, I found myself taking bolder initiatives, such as launching a mentorship program for younger event planners. Harriet beamed with pride when I pitched the idea. "I knew you had it in you," she said. Slowly, the sense of shame and guilt over revealing Jake's impotence faded. I realized that while my method was messy, unleashing the truth in a burst of anger, it also exposed how deeply wounded I had been. If he had never publicly mocked me about our personal life, I might have carried his secret to my grave. Instead, the moment I let it out, I discovered I could breathe again. A few times, I ran into Jake around town. The once self-assured grin was gone. At a local deli, I saw him trying to chat up a waitress with the same brand of one-liners. She offered a polite but cool smile, and I wondered if she'd heard the rumors or simply sensed something off. On one of those chance encounters, he saw me and called out, "Still can't take a joke, Alicia?" I turned, meeting his eyes calmly. "I can take a joke, Jake," I said in a clear voice. "I just realized I'm not one." He seemed startled, at a loss for a comeback. I walked away, feeling a sense of closure bloom in my chest. I wasn't bitter, I was simply free. Yes, I lost a marriage, but I regained myself. Looking back, I can see how the small, harmless jokes were the first cracks in the foundation of our relationship. By the time I noticed the cracks, I was too invested in keeping Jake's secret, and by extension, saving our marriage, to acknowledge how badly it hurt me. Yet the moment I spoke up, everything changed. Sometimes people ask, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Or, "Why let him embarrass you for so many years?" The honest answer is that love and loyalty can blind us. When we care about someone, we hope our silence or patience will fix what's broken. But in reality, silence just gives them permission to keep going. If there's one lesson I want people to take from my story, it's that real love requires mutual respect. If you constantly feel like a punching bag, the problem isn't that you can't take a joke. The problem is that someone who's supposed to cherish you is using humor as a weapon. Wherever you are, whether in the US or beyond, if you see echoes of my life in your own or in a friend's situation, I encourage you, speak up, set boundaries. Seek help from friends, family, or professionals. Don't carry secrets that poison your self-worth. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this story. Have you encountered someone who used sarcasm or humor to hide deeper insecurities? What do you think is the best way to handle it when someone makes you the punchline of their jokes? If you've been in a similar situation, how did you find the courage to stand up for yourself? Please share your experiences in the comments. Let's learn from each other. And if you'd like to unwind after such a heavy topic, we have a special song composed just for this community. Check the link in the description. It's a gentle tune that helped me find calm during those stormy days. I hope it can help you discharge any lingering tension too. Finally, thank you so much for listening to my story here on Revenge Valley. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. We're just getting started, and your support truly means the world to us. Remember, life's too short to settle for being the punchline. You deserve respect, honesty, and a love that uplifts you. Take care, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.
She lived in the silence of a long goodbye. A heart so strong, but she never asked why. Each hurtful little joke cut deeper than she'd show, till the day she chose to rise and let him go. All the years spent hoping he would change, all the tears she hid beneath the pain. She finally said enough and set herself free, and now she owns her story, just let her be. This is Alicia's story, standing on her own, no longer hiding secrets, no longer all alone. She found her voice in truth when everything went wrong, and now she shines where shadows don't belong. Friends saw a spark, but they never knew the cost. She stayed so loyal, though her faith was nearly lost. But one quiet night, she found the strength to speak, and in that moment, heartbreak turned into relief. She won't apologize for healing on a time, a soul reborn, leaving bitterness behind. Standing taller now in every open door, she realized her worth was meant for so much more. This is Alicia's story, standing on her own, no longer hiding secrets, no longer all alone. She found her voice in truth when everything went wrong, and now she shines where shadows don't belong. This is Alicia's story, standing on her own, no longer hiding secrets, no longer all alone. She found her voice in truth when everything went wrong, and now she shines where shadows don't belong. We all can learn from someone who breaks free, who casts away the doubt and stands in dignity. Sometimes you reach your limit, then you choose to rise. Like Alicia, let your light fill the sky. This is Alicia's story, standing on her own, no longer hiding secrets, no longer all alone. She found her voice in truth when everything went wrong, and now she shines where shadows don't belong. Where shadows don't belong. Where shadows don't belong. She's found her place where shadows